So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this panel on Black Mental Health Matters. My name is Gustavo Molinar. I use pronouns he, him, his, and I'm the Mental Health Literacy Specialist for Mental Health America of Greater Houston, and I'll be the moderator for the panel. Today, we'll hear from our staff members and community partners and members about Black mental health, particularly with ongoing current events.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Jamie Freeney. I am the director for the Center for School Behavioral Health at Mental Health America of Greater Houston. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this esteemed panel, and I'm feeling pretty good this morning.
Thank you, Jamie. How about you, Christy?
Good morning, Gustavo and everyone. My pronouns are she and her. My name is Christy Chatham, and I am the Director of Veterans Behavioral Health for Mental Health America of Greater Houston. And I'm also a member of the Mayor's Task Force for Veteran Suicide. I am feeling hopeful because we are actually having a conversation and having many dialogues around Black mental health. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Christy. How about yourself, Reggie? Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. First of all, thank you guys for having me. My name is Reggie Young. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at the Houston Food Bank. My pronouns are he and his. And I'm feeling slightly optimistic, just based upon the environment that we're living in. A little fatigued because my work is probably 100% COVID related, but beyond that, slightly optimistic.
Thank you. How about yourself, Aurora?
Yeah, my name is Aurora Harris. I'm the Regional Director of the Texas office at Young Invincibles. We're a policy advocacy organization on behalf of young adults, so millennials and Gen Z. Thank y'all for being on Facebook and watching. I've been better. I've suffered a great loss in my family recently. So they joined the ancestors even quicker than we expected. But I'm also feeling very much lifted up by his spirit today, and really, really happy to be here. And I know he'd be really proud of me for being here too. So I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, Aurora, and sorry about your loss. Patrice, could you introduce yourself?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. And of course, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Patrice Hartsfield. I am a clinician with Catholic Charities, and there I primarily see veterans and their family members. So I offer free counseling services to veterans and their family members. Right now, I am feeling I'm feeling hopeful, and I'm actually feeling joyful as well, because we're talking about things that are very important, and Black mental health is something that I'm very passionate about. I'm passionate about mental health as a whole, but most importantly, Black mental health as well.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Norris, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Dr. Norris. I'm in Jackson, Mississippi. I'm the CEO of DMN Behavior and Counseling Group here in Jackson, and I'm feeling optimistic. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Of course, and thank you to all the panelists for talking and having the discussion and answering questions. One of the questions I prepared was, where are we in the state of Black mental health with everything going on, and why is it important to discuss mental health in the Black community?
I can start that. I can answer that, Gustavo. Where are we when it comes to Black mental health? I believe that we're on the cusp of something very new. We are beginning to talk about mental health in the Black community. It's becoming not as taboo as it was before. People are being educated. People are curious about their mental health. People are learning more about traumatic events. People are learning more about themselves. People are becoming aware. people are becoming very mindful. And like I like to say, mindful is being, paying attention on purpose. And people are doing that. And so where we are in the state of Black mental health, we're on the cusp of something new, and it's also something very vital for us because we are in the middle of a pandemic. We are at civil unrest. And like I always say, the only way we can get through this and come out stronger, is we have to take care of our mental health. It is no longer an option. It's a must at this point.
Yeah, I would agree with Patrice 100%. I think about Juneteenth weekend and lots of Black folk on social media just totally recommitting themselves to racial justice, to the movement, whatever that looks like, whether it be, Black dollar, Black joy, Black mental health. I just saw a lot of people committing themselves to whatever racial justice looks like for them. And I think mental health was definitely included in that. I think about a very popular television show, Insecure, that had a very, very major character, seeing her Black therapist and, having that relationship. And I think with COVID-19 breaking lots of different structural barriers open, and putting a lot of people's mental health right at their forefront, it's something that hasn't really been ignored, and it's something that's definitely being talked about much, much more.
And to echo your sentiments, ladies, I think we're in the middle of a perfect storm. We're in the middle of a perfect storm. So like on Insecure with Self-Care Sundays, I think it's what they do. And I'm like, as soon as the Rona is lifted, I'm having self-care Sundays with my girlfriend. So I think having, President Trump in office, I think it was needed. Hear me out, because in order for this perfect storm, this setting for social change to happen, you had to have someone in office that created division and made people choose sides. And I think having that division, having a president, having someone in office that was so divisive, it caused people to finally choose our side because they didn't want to associate themselves with that side. And so I think it works out in our favor. I think this perfect storm is also allowing very in-depth conversations about mental health. I know I'm more intentional with my friends and my family about checking in. How are you? How are you doing? And not just how are you, because that can typically cause a one-word answer. But I ask, how are you doing? And dive a little deeper into that. And so I think we're at on the precipice of a lot of change, a lot of forward mobility within our mental health, with Black mental health. And I'm happy we're finally paying strategic attention to it.
Yes, I agree. I think it's important right now, more than ever, to have these open discussions. And I think it's great that we're seeing the portrayal of mental health playing out in the Black community in social media and through television. And they're not negative portrayals, they're positive portrayals. They're encouraging people to speak up, just like Aurora mentioned the Insecure, where one of the main male characters shared that he had bipolar. So I think we're going in the right direction, but conversations still need to be had around the stigma and myths and beliefs within the Black community, because they do still exist. And we know that more faith-based organizations are starting to talk about it a little bit more, but still there's a lot of discomfort because pastoral leadership may not know what to do with someone that presents with certain mental illnesses or mental challenges. And just like going to your doctor or speaking, understanding that you must speak up for yourself when you go to the doctor. You might not be asked about how your mental wellness is, but again, making sure that we're advocating for ourselves. So I think it's certainly important to have conversations with friends, with families, and such as this to ensure that we're sharing information with our community and encouraging people to speak up, encouraging people to not be afraid or fearful of how others will think of them, but letting them know that there is help and that there's a certain point in time where, yes, prayer always works, but prayer, without actually working at it is dead. So we know that we have to not only lean into our faith and into some of the higher powers that we may believe in, but also to those tangible resources that we have access to.
Definitely. Thank you. Reggie or Dr. Norris, do you have anything on this question?
No.
I can,
No.
yeah, I can add to the conversation. I definitely agree with what everybody has said, and I'm just going back to how am I doing? And I said that I'm cautiously optimistic. Is that I also agree that this is a time of transformation. I think it's an historic time within our country, and for me, I'm cautiously optimistic because whereas I do see the gains in awareness to mental health, awareness to racial equity, and more people involved in the conversation, I'm cautious because of the fact that historically we've seen advances in these areas in the past. I think about, from my perspective, uh, my readings of 1955 with Emmett Till. I think about Bloody Sunday in 1965, when you're seeing peaceful protesters uh, protesting but getting beat and bitten by dogs by police officers. And after all of these instances, there is a heightened awareness to the issues of the Black community. There is a heightened awareness of some of the challenges that our communities face. And the problem is that we still see these same issues come back. And so I'm cautiously optimistic because I want to ensure that this time frame, this opportunity, if you want to call it that, this space in which we're living in right now is given the respect that it needs in order to ensure that 10 years from now, we're not going through this again. And so as I agree with everybody that, even from my perspective as a person growing up within this country, right? I've seen the challenges of living in a dual society where the experiences that I have to go through are not the experiences that my white friends or my white colleagues have to go through, and that takes a toll on a person. And when I think about the stories that my mother said when she was a civil rights activist as a student, what she had to go through, and what my grandfather had to go through as a World War II veteran coming back to the United States and still being seen as less than a man. Mental health challenges are almost innate within our community because of the duality of the lives we have to live within this country. And so I definitely think that this is a wonderful opportunity for us to really reflect on the environmental factors that we live in that really impact our mental health. And really, it's an opportunity that we cannot let go, not only as a Black community, but just as an overall community, because there's so many factors that really lead to whether or not our health, our mental health, and our total health is going to be successful going forward.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing those perspectives. And I know that all of you touch on the fact that, we're being more open just generally, right? We're being more open about mental health, but it's more important that we discuss mental health, particularly in the Black community, right? Especially with blatant discrimination, racism, and violence, right? So my next question, based on a little bit about what you said, right, Reggie, about what we are told or the history and kind of the family history, right? But as well as with what we're seeing is how do we sit with, continue to cope, and take care of your mental health or the Black mental health, Black community's mental health, with ongoing events, right? With seeing it or experiencing it yourself or seeing it on social media. How would you take care of your mental health, or how do you even just sit with it?
Yeah, I can start. I think this is a great question. I think the first step is recognizing, like Reggie mentioned, all of these events as sort of traumatic racial stress, and to come at it from that lens, and to have what we in these spaces call trauma informed care, or trauma informed ways of being and working with one another. And what we mean by that is, similar to PTSD, except for it's kind of more ongoing. Black folks experience racial traumatic stress in this country due to the systemic violence that we face. And so that could be anything from everyday microaggressions that you might experience out in the world, to blatant hate crimes, right? To just the small indignities that come with living in a racist and capitalist society. So you kind of have to have a trauma sort of framework, when you're thinking about these issues, and really think about generational trauma and how do we kind of intervene on a lot of that. Also, trauma plays out highly in the body. So it leads to things like high blood pressure, cortisone levels, chronic fatigue, worse health outcomes physically for us. And so really understanding trauma, how it
If you joined us earlier for this event that started at approximately 11, we did experience something that is being called Zoom bombing, right? But unfortunately, as well, can be seen as a target, right? As we're discussing mental health, particularly in the Black community, in this hashtag Black Mental Health Matters event. So I do want to acknowledge what happened, right? And I do apologize for those that were either streaming us from Facebook as well as on the Zoom meeting. I do want to apologize about that. Panelists, not sure if you have any thoughts. I'm acknowledging this, right? And so I think that that's testament of what we're experiencing, right? The racism and racial trauma that is experienced in the Black community, and other communities of color. And so in that impact that it has on mental health, right? So I don't know if y'all have any comments about that, or any other comments as we were talking about the previous question.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We are here to talk about Black mental health, and then we were completely silenced, and then bombarded with racist imagery and, overtalked. So I think it's just, and we are all at work, right? And so this is a microaggression that we're facing right now, just being at work, even openly talking about these issues. So I think it was a really good example of the racial trauma that we're talking about, whether it be something small like being Zoom bomb, just being able to talk about racial trauma, to watching a modern day lynching on your television screen. I mean, these are those small indignities that add up to the trauma that I was talking about earlier. And yes, I think it was a really good example of exactly what a lot of the folks on the panel have been talking about.
Mhm. I mean, yeah, I would like to say something about it. It's very symbolic of uh, what happens on a daily basis, whether it be in the workplace, whether it be in the grocery store, whether it be in a department store. We're trying to be heard, and then someone comes in and wants to silence us, tries to silence us. And as Black people, like that, it was very symbolic. So to whomever did that, thank you. Because now we no longer have to, we don't have to paint a picture. You painted the picture for us. And so it's very symbolic of what we endure on a daily basis. It's very symbolic of what Black people have endured for some their entire lives, of trying to be heard, wanting to be heard, and peacefully wanting to be heard, just as everyone else streams and has things. There's sometimes there's issues, sometimes there's not, but it's very symbolic to what happens on a daily basis in how Black people live their lives. We are, we had to pick up and continue because that's what we have to do every day.
Definitely. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I agree with what she said. It is very symbolic, but that's the nature of the beast, and we just have to keep fighting. We don't just give us more ammunition, really, to keep going.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell them thank you.
Yes.
Because we're just going to dig our heels in harder and talk louder and share this post and talk to our friends about our mental health and continue on regardless of any attack, any cowardly attack. It was very cowardly what was done. And so it's just a sign of weakness on their part. And I think it's a sign of our resiliency as a people, that no matter how we're attacked, whatever methodology is used, that we will overcome and we will continue. And we're getting closer and closer to where we should be and where we need to be, and that no attack will ever stop us from pressing towards the mark. So thank you. You just added fuel to the fire. So great job. Great job.
Just to tag on to that, I just want to highlight what Patrice said in one fashion of it, because I thought it was brilliant. Right? It's like a lot of times when you have these types of discussions, she's right. You have to paint a picture. You have to describe the experiences that you may have had as an individual. You may have to describe the experiences that you've had within this community. But being able to see and share that experience with us through the Zoom calls is phenomenal for me. I think it was great that occurred during this format, because it highlights exactly what we're talking about in a way that we don't have to describe. It was right there for you to see in your face. And I will also add thank you, because I appreciate it.
That there's now a more central or conversation on resilience, right? And it's become mainstream to talk about resilience, but I think there's something to talk about cultural resilience, right? That as you're all saying, or as we've experienced, right? That we have sometimes the Black community and other communities of color have no choice but to get up and continue going on. So I wanted to ask about that, but also about what strengths in the Black community exist that can be maximized for positive mental health, right? Sometimes we talk that there's stigma, we talk about the negatives of mental health, but I want to ask about the positives and how we can promote those strengths in the community.
I think with that is it's simply saying that we are a strong people, and it's not by choice, but by design. Um, we have no choice, um, whether or not we want to be strong or whether we want to be resilient. Um, it's the way we survive. It has become a form of survival for us. It's not. It's again. It's not an option to us anymore. Just the being positive. It's the way that we survive, whether it was through um, enslavement up until right now in this present moment. It's how we survive. We had to be positive. We have to be hopeful, because whether, I don't think people like the person that did the Zoom bomb understand, like it only creates um, a positivity in us. We are naturally, I feel like as African American people, we are naturally hopeful and positive people. Yes, the world beats us down and it does affect our mental health, but we're naturally hopeful and positive people, because I've seen I think it was a meme on Instagram or Facebook, and it's saying that as a society and as a whole, white America is grateful, should be grateful. We don't want revenge. We only want equality. And it's by nature that we are the people that we are, because revenge could very well easily be justified, but we don't want revenge because of that natural positivity and hope that has been built in us as a people. We don't want to take over America. We don't want to, rename states and we don't want to do that. We simply ask to be treated like you treat yourself. We're not asking for anything. We're not asking for the moons and the stars. We're asking to walk on the same ground that you walk on. That's simply, what we ask. And as a Black people, through all of the trauma, when it comes to trauma, there are positive effects to trauma and there are negative effects to trauma. And as a people, we do carry a lot of the positive traits. So that resilience that we are known for, we're known to be resilient people. That comes from trauma. There are negative effects and there are positive effects. But the positive effects and the resilience that we are known for is bred out of the same trauma that is meant to destroy us. Audre Lorde said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. So we have to be positive. Being positive is political. So there's really that's who we are as a people. Yes, we suffer with depression. Yes, we suffer with anxiety. We suffer with a lot. We suffer with any mental health issue that anyone else suffers with. But you have to look at why. I think a big question is why. We, as African Americans, we are bred from trauma. So what do you expect when it comes to mental health issues? The same trauma that is expected from a brown person, a white person, or a green person, we're bred from it. We are bred from it. We are of it. It is us. It is up to us to seek the help that we need to figure out how to manage it and how to deal with it. That's why mental health is so important right now. It's no longer an option. Whether you're talking to each other that encourages you to talk to a professional, it is no longer an option.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Patrice 100%. We definitely have a sense of resilience within the Black community based on histories of trauma. I think two other big strengths that I see within the Black community is one, like a real fierce resistance to this idea of American, our Western individualism, this sense that you are making it on your own, right? I think Black Americans have been very, very resistant to that. I think about our play cousins in our community. I think about Black queer people in our chosen families. I think about, the familial common adoptions that you kind of see in Black families. And I just think about the sense of community that we have, and we bring in this real rejection that you're on your own. And I think that that's a really big strength in the Black community that helps us cultivate resilience for sure. And then the second I would say is the commitment to Black liberation in our organizing tradition. I think what trauma does is what trauma attempts to do, let me say, is it attempts to rob you of your sense of power and control over your body, over yourself, and over your destiny. And I think a lot of people come to movements with trauma looking to be healed. And our movement building and our organizing and our political advocacy work kind of helps us reclaim our power and control once again that trauma has attempted to rob from us. And so I would say those are probably the biggest things when I thought about this question that are really big strengths in the Black community that helps us continue to cultivate resilience.
And I certainly agree. And I'd like to add to that list that not only the community and the ability and the ability to rely on one another, but also having a central faith for many, many, many decades, even since going back to slavery. Our ancestors would gather and have church on their own and would sing hymns, and that like-mindedness and togetherness increases the level of resilience that you have, because you know that there are those that would agree with you, will support you, and that will go be with you on this fight. And so I would add having our faith is also a component of that resilience.
Thank you. And we do have a few questions that were asked before and are being asked on our Facebook live stream. So one is particularly about our about Black youth, right? And so the question was specifically for you, Dr. Jamie, Dr. Freeney. And so the questions from Carrie is, what concerns do you have about the impact this divide will have on our young Black youth and their social identity and development?
Certainly, thank you. And Aurora, please feel free to jump in. But I think first and foremost, I'm more concerned with how they will be received. I'm concerned about the implicit bias that rests in the school administrators, teachers, volunteers, the organizations that are working with these youth, that see them as when youth are speaking out. We see a lot of adolescents now that are joining in protests. We're seeing a lot of them lifting their voice on social media. And so there are sometimes in schools, they're seen as being loud or ghetto or boisterous. And so I'm really more concerned about how they will be received and reprimanded if their actions and them speaking out and speaking up for themselves will be taken as a negative instead of reinforced and being positive. I do know that adults or adolescents and children, just like adults, are going to experience mental health challenges as we go through this. There's frustration, there's fear, anxiety, just uncertainty with the coronavirus, but yet we're seeing continuing to see events like George Floyd and even Tamir Rice. Young Black boys and young Black girls that are of their age that are falling victim to police brutality. And so there are certainly concerns about how they're reacting to that, how they're coping with that. Of course, it's important now to talk about ways that they can positively cope and ways that they can utilize that energy to do something for the movement or to contribute in some way. And so I think that those are certainly concerns and causes for conversation that that need to be had, because they're certainly affected by all that's going on. But especially youth in Texas, they're certainly resilient. We've been through Hurricane Harvey, where they've experienced mass shootings in Santa Fe, and then some of the more recent local accidental school shootings, and now this pandemic. And that's all on top of the continuous systemic racism and discrimination that they tend to face in the school setting. So while complex trauma is certainly prevalent, there's also hope and opportunity to help shape and form and support the minds of our young people.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to piggyback on that, I mean, we're particularly interested in young adults. And so we think about what does it mean for that trauma to continue on when they, if they decide to go to a 2-year or 4-year institution, you know, the racist sort of campus climates that they're experiencing, these, the microaggressions that they experience, the lack of campus climate that's friendly to Black people and Black students. And we think about that and what does that mean for their higher education outcomes and their ability to finish school and sort of have the college experience that their white counterparts may have. We think about the pressure of being first generation, right? Like we as Black people have been in this country over 400 years and still have many Black students who are the first in their families to finish school, and what that pressure means and how they're giving back to their families. And we listen to Black students and think about those things. So we're really interested in making sure that they have the resources they need to navigate their higher education journey, whether that be access to campus counselors or peer support. So we're really, really interested in that piece as well of like once they finish K through 12, what does that higher education experience look like?
Thanks, y'all. Another question that we had was how can non-Black folks of color support their Black people in the network, right? Their friends or coworkers or other individuals in their network as we're going through all of this. I know that one of y'all touched a little bit upon that. If you can expand or any other thoughts that come to mind.
So I have, I'm sure all of us have friends from all different backgrounds. And the one thing or the first thing that was done was just a simple message of, hey, I'm just checking on you. Are you okay? It's different from years before, times before, because the stories of George Floyd or story of even my cousin who was killed by an HPD officer 5 years ago. You know, I won't say you get numb because it reintroduces that trauma every time you see it on TV. My family relives that. But the fact that now people are intentional about asking if I'm okay. Even since his death and today, I haven't had that. So the fact that now my friends that aren't of color or of a different ethnicity, they ask me if I'm okay, and they ask if how I'm doing, and can I come and see you? Or, you know, I mean, with Corona, we can't really go out to eat, but hey, can I bring some food by? Or, you know, just let's talk on the phone, let's get on a chat and have a wine night. So those different things, just simple acts. It doesn't have to be, you know, for me at least, you don't have to march in the streets for me or with me. But I think that the movement, or we're gaining momentum and movement because it's a humanity issue. It shouldn't be a Black issue, shouldn't be a white issue. It should be an issue of humanity. And I think once the other communities of color and other, you know, in our white, if they realize the humanity and the violations against humanity that's involved, then I think that different vantage point will cause a shift of thinking and will cause them to be more empathetic or, you know, have that empathy. I will also say that I work at Mental Health America of Greater Houston, and our CEO, I mean, just took like asking, you know, especially me and what my family has gone through. Her and our COO just kept reaching out to me, asking me how I was doing, asking me how my family was doing, allowing us time to take off, have a mental health day, to giving us time that if we wanted to protest, we could. If we wanted to gather our families around and have a poignant conversation about racial equality, that she gave us time to do that. And so before, and other employers I've worked for, I used to work for the Army. So I know the mission doesn't stop there. I know they're still, you know, fighting and going forward, but just that simple pause and acknowledgement, like this is happening to you, but it's happening to us as a nation. And actually, it's worldwide. Racism is not just in Texas. It's not just in America. It is across every continent in the world. So just seeing other countries with George Floyd's name on a banner marching for us, marching for the cause here in America, even though they have their own racism they have to deal with. But that solidarity I think will strengthen us as a humanity. And so I say to them, keep checking on us, keep asking how we're doing, but then see how you can move, how you can be a part of the movement and move it forward.
I can jump in right now. I appreciate what Chrissy just said, because I do think that it's interesting because, at work, at these people are checking in more than they ever had in the past, and at some levels, it's getting difficult. It's difficult to even kind of get used to because you're like, oh, no one seemed to care before. But I definitely think the check-ins are a great start when thinking about with what other people can do to assist with us. But I do think it is just a start. Similar to the things I said previously. It's like when coming to these types of issues, these issues are extremely complex, and a lot of times it's difficult for people to come to it with any type of understanding of from the perspective of how can I learn this stuff but not be offensive to Black people. A lot of my colleagues in our conversations over the last couple of weeks is like, I want to learn more, I want to ask questions, but I also don't want to offend. But the reality is that even for Black people, there was a point where we had to learn these things as well, right? And so when I think about, my experience, when I was 5, there was an incident where I was at my mother's company picnic, and there was kids jumping off of the stage. I wanted to jump off the stage with like the other kids. I go over to the stage, and one kid in front of me, he goes in, and then when I come up, there's a kid that stops me. It's like, no, he can go, but you can't go because you're a nigger, right? And so I'm like, I don't know what he's talking about, and I'm naturally defiant. So I get on the stage anyways, and I do the jump. And then the kid proceeds to pull out a knife and chases me around this area. I get away, I go to our mother, and I tell her what happened. So she tells me to sit down. And then when we get home, she has to explain what I just experienced, right? After that moment, I've had to learn from that time period on. I had to learn, I had to read, I had to try to understand the context of what me being in different environments and how people perceive me in these environments, how are they reacting and why are they reacting to these types of scenarios. And that learning process never ends, right? Because we're always experiencing new things that relate to race in Black people's experience along with race, right? And so I think that one of the things that Christy mentioned was that this is a humanity issue, and this is a humanity issue. Uh, a lot of times when we have these types of platforms, it's because an inhumane act has occurred. And we've seen several inhumane acts occur recently, right? And that again brings people to the table. It's once you're at the table and you have the mindfulness that this is an issue, it can be something that's impacting my Black colleagues and friends. Yes, checking in with them is a good start. Then, you know, like Chrissy said, what is the next step and how you can participate? One easy way to participate is just to educate. And there's a great thing around right now. There's a ton of information being passed around, and just like when I was a kid and I had to learn, I think we all have to learn if we have a true interest in really ensuring that the norm for Black people 30 years ago is not going to be the norm for Black people 30 years from now.
I'd like to pick up on one of the great points that Reggie just mentioned, and that's education and talking to children. So I think one of the ways that we can, that everybody can support this movement, and non-Black, especially non-Black families can support this movement, is by being open and honest and talking to your children about racism and what that means. Certainly the conversations between a Black family and their children are going to be different from a non-Black family and their children. And I think it's important to point out that the conversations that Black moms and dads and caregivers are having with their Black youth are not only different, but induce some emotions such as fear, anger, uncertainty, sadness. I've witnessed some of these conversations, and sometimes the child ends up crying because they ask such genuine and simple questions. Why is he mean to me? Or why would they do that to that man? And the answer, although real, is just unsettling to kids. But for Black families, I think it's important to talk about racism and not teach colorblindness, because colorblindness is it's not reality, and it just perpetuates the stigma that, oh, everybody's the same, everybody's equal, when it's just not true. I also think that it's important to start these conversations early and have them often, to help kids understand that yes, differences do exist, but we need to be supportive and we need to respect that and we need to embrace that. And you're different because of XYZ, or you're similar because of XYZ. So helping them understand how they fit into the equation, and maybe using wording like fair, because children certainly understand, oh, that's not fair, or that's fair. Especially if you have children, if they have siblings or that they're comparing to, but using language that they can understand, but certainly starting to have that conversation can change the trajectory of where our children now are mentally and emotionally, and how they respect others. It can change how that plays out in their future. So just being mindful of also the communication when you're communicating with your child, when teachers are communicating with their students about other race and ethnicities, being mindful of the verbal and nonverbal cues that you're using. That those are also things that perpetuate racism and the differences. For example, I ran into a Black man at the store versus I ran into a man at the store and he complimented me on my blouse. Or there was a Mexican kid running around and I almost fell. And so instead of using those types of adjectives, just saying there was a child that was running around and almost fell. So you need to be careful. So just again, being mindful about how we as caregivers are talking to our adolescents and children about race, but making sure that we have those discussions.
Thanks, Shaw. So a few more questions, right? Also, Dr. Tim Norris is on the call now, just obviously with some technical difficulties. Sometimes the video goes in and out. But the question is, or summarize the question is, how do we talk about mental health and faith, right? Particularly this question was asked by a public school employee, and how in public schools, right, in the public system, perhaps we talk about the separation of church and state, but we know that faith is an important aspect of the Black community, of other communities of color. So how do we promote that spirituality or that faith alongside of mental health, or how do we hold both of those things in line, either together or separately, without necessarily promoting a specific faith for this public school employee?
So, as the granddaughter and daughter of a preacher, I'll be glad to tell you, I'm seeing a shift, right, with or at church or in the faith community, right, in the Black faith community. Before, it was around mental health, pray about it, talk to God about it, and He'll change it. And I begin to think or wonder, well, if we go to the doctor and we trust the doctor to give us medication or give us a treatment plan, or we go to the eye doctor or any type of physician, they aid in your well-being. So what is so different about having a psychologist or a psychiatrist to aid in your well-being as well? Your mental and your physical health are interrelated. And so having those conversations around your spiritual health, and including that, I think telling our children your spiritual health, your mental health, and your physical health are all interrelated, and they're all equally as important. And then they can have that conversation. They can have that conversation with their loved ones when they return home. I know Mental Health America, we actually we have a screening tool online, and you can enter in like whatever else. If you're feeling sad, if you have a loss of appetite, you can enter in or put in your concerns, and it'll give you. I mean, it's not a diagnosis, but it will let you know what you're leaning towards as far as a diagnosis. And then you can take that and have a conversation with your physician, with your family members, or a mental health care provider, and they can start a dialogue. So I think adding your faith into your conversation with your children and with your family, I think will create a positive dialogue that will, I guess, show children that there is a community that surrounds them. And I think the more that they see that they're surrounded by all sides of people that love them, and that includes their faith community, I think that they will start to feel whole. And if they haven't already, and then they can know that they have other allies and other tools in their arsenal. It's military. They have tools in their arsenal that they can use to help them feel better. I mean, and that goes for adults as well. Our faith, I think growing up, disconnecting faith from mental health. If you acknowledge that you were depressed, then it was, go pray about it. Like, I don't even know if I called it depression when I was younger, or called it anxiety when I was younger, right? I think when we were younger, I'm sad, or I'm in a funk, or I'm not feeling well. And so actually saying that, okay, I'm depressed today, it doesn't mean you're any weaker or there's something wrong, or you're crazy or whatever. It just means that you need to have a conversation. You need to get back and get your life back into balance, and that's all that it means. Anxiety is also a way that our body, it's a natural reaction of our body. The problem is when we stay at an anxious state. When your eyes blink, when there's dirt in your eye, the way that your eyes blink to protect your eye from dirt or dust, it's a protective covering. That's what your eyelid is. That's what anxiety is, right? So understanding that some of these mechanisms that God has placed, or these reactions that God has placed in our bodies, is a sign for us to get help. So utilizing those signals as not a definition that something is wrong with you, or it doesn't define that you have a mental health condition or what have you, but it may mean that you're out of whack or you're off balance and you need to go seek help. So I know that my church, we've been having a lot of conversations around mental health. Before we haven't. And so I think as long as churches create the dialogue, or in that faith-based community, that will carry over when they go into when our children get into school, or when they're with their playmates, or when they're with their family members, their cousins, or what have you. So just creating a safe space to have a conversation, but to talk about the importance of the totality of your health, of your well-being with your children, I think will create other conversations around other methodologies for our well-being.
Sorry, thank you, Chrissy. Does anyone else have any comments on faith and mental health, and how to have those hand in hand?
Sure. Just briefly, I think it's important to acknowledge that mental illness is biblical. It's in the scripture, and so just having the being confident as a church leader to talk about it and to preach about it, I think will help to encourage more people to seek help. The Bible says, don't be anxious for nothing. So it's acknowledging that there is anxiety, that you will feel anxious. So certainly using scripture to as a foundation for the message of seeking help will be something that will help, I think, more Black communities, more people in the Black community feel comfortable reaching out for help. And then also spiritual leaders being transparent. They're certainly not, they are susceptible to mental health challenges just like anyone else. And so having the ability to acknowledge and share that, I also think will be helpful in reducing the stigma and increasing the number of people that are getting help.
Thank you, Dr.
And
Freeney.
yeah,
Mhm.
I would like to add, you know, bridging that gap between mental health and faith um, is really it's a big thing too, because I think now we're just now getting to the point to understand that the mind and the body work together, and simply knowing and understanding that the mind is what the body does, and knowing that, you know, there are abstract things that we use for like soul and heart, but those are also actually tangible things that happen and go on as well. Like we talk about gut feelings and things like that, not understanding that there's actually a nerve, the polyvagal nerve that connects to your gut, and it lets you know what's going on. So things that sometimes that we looked at as being spiritual are now coming to the forefront, and there's research that is showing that it's you know it's physical as well. So we're at a point in mental health and physical health where I feel like they can no longer separate themselves. It goes hand in hand. It's to a point where now the gut is being considered as the second brain. So the thing that you call, you know, where you get like an actual physical feeling in the gut and you say it's your heart telling you, it's synonymous language. It's synonymous language. Um, and a lot of times people, I know in the faith community, we want to steer away from things such as meditation and even yoga because we feel like it's a practice of something else. But you know, for me, the best explanation for meditation simply was, because for me it was trying to understand the difference in prayer and meditation, or was there a difference in prayer and meditation? And the most helpful explanation that I read was, prayer is when we talk to God. Meditation is when we listen. So if we're constantly praying and we're not taking the time and the space to listen, then what are we, why? Why? You know, like I said, we have two ears and one mouth. And I think we use our mouth a lot more than we do the two ears that we have. But I think, again, coming to the point of when it comes to children, giving children the language and the vocabulary to express feeling sad and feeling happy and feeling glad and feeling joy. Because a lot of the times people don't communicate things because they don't have the vocabulary. Children don't communicate sexual abuse because they don't have the vocabulary. So vocabulary is huge. So start by sitting with, you know, your children, sitting with yourself, your friends, your family, and having those feeling discussions. And whether you got to pull out a chart with feelings on them at the age of whatever, it's okay, because more than likely we were not given the vocabulary to communicate, you know, what's going on and what we're feeling anyway. So we can start anywhere. You can start at 3, or you can start at 30, or you can start at 73. It doesn't matter. But we have to educate ourselves on what is happening with ourselves.
Thank you for that. So our second to last question comes from Colleen, specifically around legislation or systemic change. So the question is, it's obvious that we need to address systemic disparities, right, that impede access to healthcare, education, and other aspects of Black mental health and Black health. Do you have any any ideas of how to move forward in terms of systemic change or legislation that you think would help here, Aurora? I think that you wanted to chime in on this.
Sure, I love this question, right? Because I think asking about Black mental health is an inherently political enterprise. Because you're calling into question the lived experiences of an oppressed people, right? So I definitely love this question. I think one of the biggest things we can do is protect what we have right now. So right now, our Attorney General, Ken Paxton, is still filing a lawsuit to dismantle the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, President Obama's signature healthcare law that can completely change health systems in this country. And definitely want to make sure that we're protecting that and we're pushing back against that legislation as much, not against the legislation, but against the lawsuit as much as we can. And also taking a critical look at some of the things that our governor is doing in response to COVID-19, not expanding, Medicaid access for low income people in the state. I think those are two of the biggest critical pieces of legislation that would really get a lot of Black folks and this low income folks in Texas and across the country access to healthcare. So those are two big actions I would say people can take right now, is making sure that we're protecting the Affordable Care Act, the piece of legislation we have right now, and putting pressure on Governor Abbott to expand Medicaid in our state.
Thank you, Aurora. Anyone else?
I would admonish us to run for office. We definitely should vote. Typically, the voter turnout during a presidential election is higher than our local elections. So I wouldn't say we reverse it, but we need to come in with the same intensity as an election in a presidential year for those years where we're electing our city council members, where we're electing our state officials, our governors, our mayors. We have typically had a low voter turnout in those elections. And so we definitely need to vote. I also believe we need to be educated voters. Some people believe in voting down a ticket, but you may vote a straight party ticket and miss someone that may advocate for what you actually believe in and vote for someone that doesn't. So it's okay to vote straight party, but at least be educated on what the person that you're voting for, the people that you're voting for, knowing what their platform is. And lastly, which is also, I think running for office as a state board, as a school board representative or a state rep, get involved, run for office. It's one thing for us to protest and demand change, but if there's no law or legislation that accompanies that, then those voices and those cries out for change won't change. It won't change. It won't move the needle. And so now we're seeing congressmen and we're seeing senators kneeling at the state capitol. Great photo op, but now we need to hold them accountable. What laws are you passing that will help us? Not just policing reform. There are so many injustices. We'll be working on this for years to come. But tackling that elephant one bite at a time, right? So I think it's important to vote. I really do. I think it's important to be knowledgeable about issues and knowledgeable about who you're voting for and what they stand for. We can vote the same person in the office that hasn't even helped us for years. In some instances because they look like us, in some instances because they give us good lip service or they show up at our churches on Sunday morning. And so our votes shouldn't be that easily won. I know Black women, we have elected governors just because of our vote. We have changed the voting from conservative to liberal. We have changed the dynamics of a whole voting block of people for a specific election. Black women, we've done that. And so we have to make our representatives, those local and national and federal, we have to hold them accountable. So it's not just enough. I'll say this again because this really is one of my pet peeves, is just showing up at church on Sunday morning for a photo op or coming to an event for a photo op, and you nor your staff they've done little to nil to help us as a people. So Yes, it's great to vote for them. It's great to have the representation, but they should have to work for your vote, right? They should have to work for your loyalty. They should have to work for the funding that your community needs. If your community is not getting the funding that it needs, put someone in office that will advocate for you. Put someone in office that has advocated for you. They may not be in an elected position, but talk to them and ask them and encourage them to run for office, because you'll know that you'll have someone that believes in what you believe in fighting on your behalf. So I encourage all of us to get out there and vote, but run for office. Research, find an office that you can run for, whether state, local, or even nationally.
And just really quickly, just because I can't add much to what Christy said, because she's absolutely right. But also complete the census. Please complete the census. This is going to determine who's representing you, how many people are representing you, and what type of social funding is coming to your community. Complete the census.
Yes, thank you for that reminder and making sure that you complete the census if you can online, right? I know that, or if you got it in paper, and that it's illegal, right? That they can't share your legal status, right? If for those that are undocumented, so making sure that we also count everyone. It does provide for funding. It does provide for how we are counted, right? So making sure that we do that. And then I want to be cognizant of everyone's time here. I do appreciate everyone giving your perspectives and giving your answers, especially after what we experienced earlier. So I want to end the question with a message of hope, right? So what message do you have for the Black community around what to do next? You know, what are next steps, message of hope, or anything in how you'd like to close? Not sure who would like to start.
I can start that. I don't mind. Okay, so a message of hope. I think one of the most important things that we need to do as a people, as Black people, as people in general, is is, um, is to educate ourselves on African American history, on history, Black history, African history as a whole. Because to kind of elaborate on what Christy was saying is, if we don't know our history, people can repackage it and sell it to us. And basically what's happening is, there might be a little clause in the law or the proposition or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing that happened 60 years ago. So educating ourselves on what, not only what's going on, but what happened. Listening. I listen to old artists, Nina Simone and Billie Holiday. The things that they are singing about, they were singing about in 1950, is still happening in 2020. And any time in between, the same things that James Baldwin and Malcolm X and W.E.B. Du Bois were talking about in the early 1900s are still happening in 2020. Right now, everything is out, everything is available. There are movies, there are books, there are websites, there are, colleagues, there are people that you can talk to. So to be hopeful, I say, is to educate yourselves on history. Know what's happening. Know what happened, so you don't allow it to be repackaged and resold to you, and sometimes in the form of having you push an agenda that doesn't benefit you. There are a lot of agendas that are being pushed now that were detrimental to us 50 years ago, but it's just been repackaged. And they can repackage it and it can be resold if you don't know what it is. So I share hope with you. However, just know that there's always someone there holding hope for you until you are able to share and hold hope for yourself. But I believe hope comes from educating and knowing what happened, what's going on, Like I said, there are so many things that are present and are happening today that if you sit and listen to music of prominent Black musicians and artists, it is still happening. And so if we continue to allow it to repeat itself, it weighs in on our hope box, you know. So taking time and educating yourself, educating your children, so they know what's happening and what's going on. And at the end of the day, it's something that was, coined probably in the 50s and 60s. Knowledge is power. It is key to support us through this and through anything and everything to come. We have to know. If we have to know, it is imperative that we know what is happening, what has happened, because if not, history will repeat itself. Black history was taken out for a reason. It wasn't by chance. It was for a reason. So when we become to know who we are as a people, we walk different. We hold our heads different. We don't allow things to happen. And it's not anything that's, tucked away in a box or anything like that. It's once you have knowledge of who you are, who your people are, who you were, you hold yourself different. You cannot be the same person once you know who you are.
Yes, and I certainly agree and want to expand upon the education and teaching the history part. I certainly agree that history is packaged in a way that certain individuals want us to digest it. And so I would encourage, through the lens of systemic change, that we advocate for how history is taught. Before you teach slavery, teach that Black people were queens and kings. And when you teach slavery, teach the fact that we had to develop ways to build this country. We helped to build this economy. So it's not that we were just being owned by other people, but we have major contributions to the society, and have contributed and continue to contribute to the society that we live in today. But on the flip side, also teach that not all white people were slave owners, that there were white people that stood in solidarity during the civil rights period, that were wanting to end and abolish slavery and work through discrimination. So knowing your history, absolutely, and pushing for change in how history is taught in schools and making sure that the full story is there, I think is important. The other two things I want to say is to give yourself grace and give others grace. Be kind to yourself, be compassionate to yourself. There are a lot of different feelings and emotions and things that we're having to navigate now with transitions and uncertainty, but certainly leverage that compassion that you have for others and use it on yourself. And then lastly, this fight we get, some people experience fatigue, some people are tired, but know that it's important for you to acknowledge that you are tired, but take time to refuel and to get back up in the fight, because we're in this together, and we will continue to be a strong body of people, as we've always been.
Thank you, Dr. Freeney. Anyone else would like to offer a message of hope? Christy?
Of course, right? So let me unmute myself. Okay, great. So I want to start by saying that America has never really atoned for its sins, right? So during the Holocaust, in Germany and in Europe, they have a Day of Atonement where where Germany recognizes what they did to a people, right? To oppress a people. And so I think knowing our history, but also holding this country accountable to recognize what they did to oppress a people and what they continue to do. So that's one thing. I think if America does atone, right, for its sins, or recognize and not water down slavery, not water down the civil rights movement, as long as that happens, or if we start there, I think as a country we can move by leaps and bounds. And so as you talk to your legislatures and you talk to your elected officials, start talking up that language of a day of recognition, a day of atonement for slavery and for oppressing a people. Because if we don't acknowledge, if America does not acknowledge that they treated a group of people like this, like Patrice says, we're doomed to repeat it, right? So, and include watering it down. The second thing, my pastor, Pastor Ralph West, said this at George Floyd's funeral. But I want my people to understand that there's always obscurity before greatness. And there's a moment that your obscurity will meet your purpose. And at that moment, that's where greatness will manifest. So do not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we will reap if we faint not. Keep fighting, keep trying, bring your brother and sister along, but bring your brother and sister that doesn't look like you along with the fight as well. So be hopeful, do not faint, do not get weary, because when you're weak, we'll be that much stronger holding you up. So let's continue to encourage each other to communicate one message, and that's of unity, but also acknowledgement of an oppressed people. So let's just continue to support each other, support your sisters, support your brothers, and just keep fighting, because we will reap if we faint not.
I can go. So I would say that just in general, Black people are very hopeful. I think about, the experiences I've had talking with my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, and the experiences that they've had that when I think about mine seem so drastically worse, just difficult, hard situations that they've had to endure. And then the stories that they tell about their parents are even worse. And there's this long lineage of challenges that Black people have had to overcome for centuries that we essentially inherit in one way or another. But throughout all of that time, they have always been optimistic. They have always been hopeful. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be at this moment. For me, as I think about what's going on in this time, and I said it before, I want to ensure that we do not take this opportunity for granted. We have ears that are listening to our voices when they were not listening before. We have people willing to get their hands dirty when we did not have those hands available before. And the reality is, we've been living a series of marathons when it comes to racial equity within this country. And we've been handed a baton from our parents, from their parents, and from their ancestors as well. And so now that we have the baton, now that we have the hands, now that we have the ears, the challenge is, what are we going to do with it? I know what I'm going to do. What are you going to do?
Thank you, Reggie. Aurora or Dr. Norris?
Yeah, sure. I'll make this very quick. So 3 things. I think it's very telling that our slogan right now in the Black Lives Matter movement is "I can't breathe." So, those were the last words of George Floyd and Elijah McClain and many others. So I would just encourage Black folks and Black activists to connect to your breath and make sure that you're breathing and meditating. Be kind to yourself, as I've heard many others say. If you are blessed right now to have a job, honor what unions won and only work 8 hours a day. And then my third thing, message of hope, would be just to continue to create hopeful spaces for Black people. Help host those Zoom calls with the quarantini, do all those fun things, those Zoom movie nights, whatever you can do to make sure that we're cultivating Black joy with one another. And I think we always have hope in that.
Thank you, Aurora. Dr. Norris?
Okay.
through all of this, I agree with everything that's been said. The voting and education, the history. And I'm sorry, I'm having technical difficulties, so my video is not showing up for some reason. I don't know, but you all can hear me though. But I think respect. I think we've lost respect for each other, and I think we need to get back to that. Yeah, we can riot, we can picket, we can march, we can do all that, but we have to get back to respecting each other, respecting our culture, respecting our heritage, getting our history, learning our history, because that's going to take us to the next level. Because back in the day when my grandmother was coming up, she respected her neighbors. She respected the ones across the street. She respected everybody. We've lost that. I think we need to get back to that care, because we have a voice. Yes, we have a voice, but we have a tendency now of not listening to each other. We just kind of want to kind of throw stones at each other. We need to lift each other up and respect one another, and that's going to take us a lot further.
Thank you for that. And so thank you everyone that tuned in that first, and then tune in again via our Facebook Live. And thank you panelists for your time and your energy, right, in providing your perspectives or in providing and being on this panel. I want to point out, right, at MHA Houston, this is one of the many conversations that we're having, and one of the many events that we'll have. July is designated as Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Mental Health Awareness Month, to highlight and center the narratives of Black, Indigenous, and other folks of color. So we'll have more events throughout the year, but specifically in July. So thank you again, and I hope that you have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.